Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for October 8th, 2024. Today we're going to talk about something that's personal. Do you have the guts to fight for a better future? Because we're at a moment now which is sometimes called in classical literature a punctum saliens, a moment in which the continued evolution of a system has reached an end, where you must break through the boundaries of the existing principles which control a system and move to a new system. This has been developing over a period of time. We've been talking about this as a transition period, one which is extremely dangerous because the forces of the Malthusian imperial order, which control the existing system, don't want to let go. And they're willing to do whatever they have to do to keep the human race trapped in a system which benefits a small number of people, a handful of billionaires and their corporate cartels, at the expense of the general welfare of 8 billion people. Not only that, but they're committed to reducing the number of people on the planet. And in doing that, they're unleashing the horsemen of the apocalypse. We see the wars that continue. We see people, senile old farts like Biden, who barely can find his way across a stage, being directed by genocidalists who insist that the old order is the only order that can be allowed. And that's an order operating under rules of the City of London and Wall Street. They call it a rules-based order, but there's no rules-based order. There's what they want, and anything else is unacceptable. So for them, the wars have to continue. Their goal is to weaken and ultimately break apart Russia, to target China and even break apart China, because China represents an option that's an alternative to the collapsing system, and to continue the geopolitical game of dividing and conquer the Middle East. Their strategy is no negotiations, no diplomacy. You do what we say, and we'll back it up with military force and with printing funny money. And any alternative to the dollar system is disallowed and is a potential cause for war. So these are conditions which are unacceptable to the vast majority of nations, as we see at the UN General Assembly, when the US is pretty much alone in defending the wars in Ukraine and now the expanding war into Lebanon by the lunatic Bibi Netanyahu, whose goal is, number one, his survival, and number two, the end of the Palestinian problem by ending the Palestinian people living in Palestine. Now, it's especially unacceptable to people around the world when an alternative is emerging. And the outlines of this alternative are quite familiar to those of you who are supporters of the LaRouche organization, because it's been the work of LaRouche over decades to establish a diplomatic solution based on principles of physical economy. That is a scientific basis for how we increase the wealth available to a society to allow for an increase in the potential relative population density. Now, this means that for LaRouche, we're not involved in a zero-sum game where one group's gain is another group's loss, but a constant, if uneven, improvement in physical economic activity, which increases the overall so-called economic pie to allow for a bigger chunk for more people, as opposed to shrinking the pie to cause a Darwinian struggle for the survival of the fittest to see who can gain a bigger piece of that shrinking pie. Now, this idea of LaRouche is based on the whole conception of advances in science and technology. That is, the discovery of new physical principles that can be translated through technological advance, through machine tool development, and so on, to allow for constant increases in the productivity of labor. That's what is the basis of wealth increasing, not conning people into betting on pieces of paper, the so-called financialization system, but actually increasing the total wealth production capability of society. And that is how you have increases in standard of living, improved standard of living, which allow for improved education, cultural exchange, and so on. So for LaRouche, there's a very clear pathway for peace. It's cooperation for this kind of economic development. Now, where are we seeing this? Do we see this as a policy in the United States, in Europe? No, in the United States and Europe, the strategy is divide the world up into geopolitical units, just as it's to divide populations of nations into different identity politic groups and pit them against each other. And meanwhile, the billionaires get their cut at the top and keep running these policies of divide and conquer. But we're seeing a change now with the emergence of the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa alliance, which is growing, going into the October 22nd to 24th BRICS summit in Kazan. They're defining an alternative system. This is what Putin talked about on October 4th when he said, measures for establishing an international payment system are underway. They're progressing, maybe slowly, but they are progressing. What does he mean by that? Establishing a sanctions-proof international exchange capability that allows for the expansion of trade, whether it's using national currencies, whether it's moving towards some kind of exchange rate based on physical goods production, raw material reserves, or whatever. They're working on it. This is what's in the way in process as part of the transition away from the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system, which was replaced by financialization, in which handfuls of speculators determine the value of everything based on daily bets. And when the bets go bad, governments bail them out, but the people who are holding the instruments, that is, the people with retirement accounts, with stock accounts, they take the losses, the billionaires get bailed out. Instead, Putin and the BRICS are moving toward a sanctions-proof exchange system, and the model for that would be to generate credit, national credit, and credit across national lines to allow for projects such as the Belt and Road Initiative, corridors of transportation and economic development that cross continents. That's what British geopolitics, the British imperial model, sees as the greatest threat to control by the West, is a unifying commitment to trade and cultural exchange. And in that system, in the LaRouche system, the value added through technological and scientific progress is available to the whole society, as opposed to value subtracted and put in the banks of the wealthiest. So we have to end these Anglo-American wars. We need a unified anti-war movement. Ukraine is moving to a moment of truth. Ukraine cannot win. Biden's going to Germany to try to again say, let's give Zelensky more weapons and let's hold out for a miracle. At the same time, they refuse to accept the loss for political reasons. They're going to defend Zelensky to the last Ukrainian. In Southwest Asia, you have to end the blackmail by Israel. We see a potentially interesting fight developing between Macron and Netanyahu. Well, let's see what comes out of that. But the idea that Israel can commit genocide anywhere in the region is unacceptable. What's important to note is that the world doesn't need a United States to run a unipolar order. And it doesn't want that either. They want the United States to be part of a system of mutual benefit in which trade and cultural understanding is the goal of the system as opposed to control. So we need to rally not just behind an anti-war platform, and there should be an anti-war platform, which can include all people from the so-called left and right who recognize that war is a waste of human potential. But we need to jump into a new dynamic, using LaRouche's idea of physical economy as the basis for peace and development. I'm going to link an article in the description section which discusses this question. LaRouche's physical economic diplomacy can defeat the war party. And I'd urge you to read it, circulate it, and join our fight today.